Hello, movie lovers. Today, I'll be telling you a heart-pounding survival thriller that'll have you gripping the edge of your seat. It is the 2024 action horror movie, No Way Up, where a routine flight takes a horrifying turn and a handful of survivors find themselves trapped underwater, battling depleting oxygen levels, lurking predators, and their own fears. Can anyone make it out alive? Join us in this recap. In the middle of the ocean, a woman's body falls into the water and floats for a brief moment before her eyes snap open in terror. At the same time, Brandon jolts awake, gasping for air in his room. It was just another nightmare, one of many that have haunted him since the day he failed to protect the governor's wife. Now, he serves as the bodyguard for her daughter, Ava, but he is still burdened by the guilt of his past mistake. Later that morning, Brandon and Ava arrive at the airport, where Ava reunites with her friends, Jed and Kyle. The two young men exchange glances of discontent when they realize Brandon is accompanying them. Ava explains that her father wouldn't have allowed her to go on this trip without security. Reluctantly, they agree to the arrangement and proceed to board the plane. Inside, Ava and her friends take seats at the back, several seats away from Brandon, so they can have some privacy. However, as she looks around inside the plane, she can't shake the unsettling thought. There are far too few passengers on this flight. Shortly after takeoff, a slight shake runs through the aircraft, but the passengers dismiss it as ordinary turbulence. However, moments later, the plane shakes violently again, and outside, the engine begins to overheat. The pilot calmly announces that they'd hit a flock of birds and assures them there's nothing to worry about. But soon, the vibrations intensify. A loud explosion rips through the air as one of the engines catches fire. The pilot's voice breaks through the intercom, ordering everyone to fasten their seatbelts. Suddenly, a section of the engine tears away, crashing into the side of the plane and killing a passenger instantly. The impact caused a pressure drop, and everyone was now in full-blown chaos. More panic erupts as those without seatbelts are flung from their seats as they desperately claw at anything to hold onto, but it's futile. In a few seconds, the aircraft's structure gives way, and an entire section of the wall blows off, exposing the passengers to the open skies. One by one, they are sucked out of the plane as their screams are drowned by the wind. Brandon makes a desperate grab for a man floating midair, but the force is too strong. The man is torn from his grasp and vanishes into the sky. When one of the flight attendants rushes to save a man on the edge, her attempt proves fatal as both of them are ripped away from the aircraft. With most of its passengers lost, the plane plunges downward at an alarming speed before slamming into the ocean. Upon impact, the fuselage splits apart, allowing water to fill the cabin. Brandon barely has time to react as a jagged piece of metal pierces his chest. The seats collapse forward and the aircraft continues to sink deeper into the sea until it finally rests on the ocean floor. Miraculously, due to the plane's angle, an air pocket forms in the back, allowing Ava, Jed, Kyle, and the flight attendant Danilo space to catch their breath. But Kyle is badly injured as he had suffered a fracture from the crash. A tense silence fills the cabin as the survivors listen to the scary sounds around them. Then they notice movement in the water, and moments later, Brandon emerges, pulling Rosa, a young girl and her unconscious grandmother, Marty, into the air pocket. Danilo quickly begins chest compressions as he tries to revive her. Time passes, and just when all hope seems lost, Marty gasps back to life. Moments later, Rosa turns to Brandon with worried eyes and asks about her grandfather. Brandon hesitates before delivering the devastating truth. He didn't make it. Ava checks her phone, but at the depth they are, there's no signal. The reality settles on them as they realize that they are trapped, surrounded by water and darkness, with no way to call for help. As panic begins to set in, Brandon takes charge. He tells them that the air pocket is keeping them alive for now, but they must remain calm and wait for rescue. With time running out and oxygen levels depleting, their survival depends on their ability to stay composed. With his words, the survivors try to stay calm as Danilo reassures them, believing the pilots must have called for help before the crash. Rescue should be on the way soon. Meanwhile, Brandon suggests they secure backup oxygen in case their situation worsens. But when Danilo checks the emergency storage at the back of the plane, he discovers that the tanks are empty. As more tension builds, Marty recalls that one of the passengers had a medical oxygen tank. So, Brandon immediately volunteers to retrieve it. Before diving in, Marty makes a small request: to bring back her late husband's hat. Swimming through the aisles, Brandon carefully checks each lifeless body still strapped into their seats. He eventually finds the hat and grabs it, unaware of the shadow moving just outside the windows. Pushing forward, he locates the medical oxygen tank and retrieves it as well. Just as he's about to turn back, he takes a moment to scan the wreckage for anything else that could be useful. That decision proves to be a fatal mistake. Out of nowhere, a massive shark rushes in through the hole, clamping down on him with great force. Brandon desperately tries to break free, but the beast is relentless in its attack. Meanwhile, the group notices the disturbances in the water. Ripples form and spread, signaling that something is happening beneath them. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the ripples vanish. A moment later, Brandon emerges from the water as he gasps for breath. His body is covered in deep wounds with blood seeping into the water around him. With a sad expression, he tosses the oxygen tank and the hat to the others before locking eyes with Ava. He mutters an apology to her, and then, in a horrifying instant, he is yanked back underwater as the shark drags him away. Paralyzed with fear, the remaining survivors retreat into the employee area, determined to wait for rescue. They realize that following Brandon's advice seems like their only hope. Meanwhile, Marty takes it upon herself to tend to Kyle's broken arm. She reveals that she was a nurse during the war as she explains how she had met her husband under similar circumstances. With the limited supplies, she improvises a splint by using thick magazines and bandages. Kyle screams in pain as she sets the bone, but she manages to get the job done. In the meantime, a search helicopter circles the last known location of the airplane, looking for any signs of the crash. Since the governor's daughter was among the passengers, this was a top priority rescue for the men. Unfortunately, from their vantage point, they see nothing but endless water. Back at the wreckage, the survivors hear a shifting sound as the plane tilts slightly, making it clear that it could collapse at any moment. The group starts to contemplate their options, and just then, the water starts turning red. The sounds of splashing and tearing flesh make it clear. The sharks have returned, feasting on the bodies of the dead passengers. The wreck shakes again as the sharks move and slam into debris of the fuselage. Rosa begins to break down, but Ava reassures her, insisting that help will arrive soon. High above, the rescue team in the helicopter were not any closer to finding them, and their fuel gauge was getting low as well. In the meantime, the survivors notice that water level is rising, and they estimate they have around 3 to 4 hours before it reaches the back of the cabin. But the falling metal and slow trickle from the ceiling tell a different story. They may not have that long. Then, without warning, the plane lurches further, and the drop sends debris falling as the plane slides deeper into the waters. Then, just as quickly as it started, the movement stops. The plane settles again, this time in an even more dangerous position. This fall caused the water level inside to rise at an alarming rate. They soon realize they have no choice but to leave the wreckage before it completely floods, so they devise a plan. The biggest threat remains the sharks circling outside. Rosa recalls a lesson from school that sharks don't like bubbles. This gives them an idea, but there's another major problem. They won't be able to hold their breath long enough to escape. Kyle suddenly remembers that some passengers had been traveling with scuba gear. Danilo confirms this, explaining that the equipment is stored in the baggage hold which is accessible through the hatch. However, he says that the air tanks would have been emptied before the flight for safety reasons. Ava tells them that the remaining equipment might still be useful. But Jed's pessimism eventually overwhelms her as she excuses herself to the bathroom. There, she breaks down as the plane creaks threateningly around her. Moments later, she regains her composure and returns to the group. Meanwhile, above the surface, the rescue helicopter is running dangerously low on fuel. With only 15 minutes left, the search effort seems futile until suddenly, they notice some floating debris. Immediately, the divers jump into the water, following the trail of the wreckage until they locate the submerged plane. When they spotted movement outside the window, the survivors frantically waved. One diver swims toward the wreckage, while the other signals to the group, assuring them that help has arrived. Just then, disaster strikes again. A massive shadow emerges from behind the diver. The group sees it first, desperately gesturing to warn the diver, but he turns too late. In a flash, he's gone. His severed leg soon floats past the window, cutting off any form of hope for the survivors. As panic sets in all over again, they scan the wreckage for the second diver. But minutes pass with no sign of him. So they assume the worst. After several minutes with no words from the divers, the helicopter crew are forced to abandon the search. They mark the coordinates as reinforcements are already en route. In the meantime, Ava, refusing to give up, suggests a necessary course of action. If the second diver is truly gone, his oxygen tank might still be salvageable. So, she peers into the water and spots something, but she is unable to confirm what it is. Jed offers to take a look, and he climbs on the seats for a better view. However, he soon loses his balance and falls into the water. The group immediately tries to rescue him, but the water is creepily calm. Then suddenly Jed resurfaces, laughing. He had faked distress to scare them. But his joke turns deadly when he hesitates too long. In a moment, the shark strikes and drags him away, but the group reacts instantly, pulling at his arms and trying to rescue him from the grip of the beast. Through their sheer determination, they manage to wrest him free and pull him back into the cabin. Then in a moment of realization, they found that Jed's leg was gone. Blood spreads through the water as he continues to scream in agony. Marty acts quickly, taking Rosa away from the gruesome sight as she works to stop the bleeding. Using seat belts, she crafts a makeshift tourniquet, tightening it to prevent further blood loss. Jed continues to cry as he realizes that his dreams of competing in triathlons are over. Despite the unfortunate scenario, Ava knows there's no time to grieve. If they have any hope of escaping, they need that scuba equipment. So she calms herself down and prepares to take the risk. When Danilo opens the hatch, Ava dives in and lights up the darkness with a flare. She searches frantically until she finally spots the scuba equipment. Just as she reaches for it, an octopus startles her, and at that exact moment, her flare goes out and throws her into darkness. Above, the others grow anxious as the light disappears, and they fear the worst. Moments later, Ava emerges, gasping for breath with the equipment in hand. They hurriedly open the bags and find diving suits and masks, but to their dismay, there are only 4 sets. Before they can formulate a plan, a loud thud reverberates through the plane. They rushed to see what had happened, but they found nothing outside. When they turn back, Jed is already dead. Although Ava attempts chest compressions, Marty tells her that it wouldn't help. Suddenly, the plane shifts again, sliding downward. This time, the descent suddenly stops when the cockpit breaks off. Then, the water starts rising faster than before. Recalling Rosa's earlier comment about bubbles, they try to devise a plan as they intend to use the small oxygen canisters from the emergency masks to create bubbles and deter the sharks. However, the distance to the surface remains a challenge. Kyle, who is still reluctant, finally confesses a childhood accident that had left him traumatized and unable to swim well. With encouragement from Ava and Rosa, he tries to calm himself for the attempt. So, Ava gathers as many oxygen masks as possible, avoiding deeper water where the sharks lurk. Outside, the predators continue to ram the plane, and the ceiling quakes under pressure, threatening to give way. In the nick of time, the group hurriedly changes into the diving suits. Marty, knowing she would only slow them down, volunteers to go without one. She has already made peace with her fate. With a final goodbye to Jed, the survivors dive into the water. As they swim out, the plane begins to slide once more. Then, the cockpit finally detaches and falls into the abyss. Without its anchor, the entire plane is doomed to follow. Marty urges Ava to go first, taking Rosa with her. The two swam through the narrow corridor, only to find their path blocked by a massive shark. Thinking fast, Ava releases an oxygen canister, creating a burst of bubbles that disorients the predator long enough for them to slip past. Danilo and Kyle follow shortly after, but Marty stays behind, watching as the water engulfs the plane. She knows she won't make it. As the rising water closes in, she silently prepares to reunite with her husband. Suddenly in a panic, Kyle swims back, gasping for air in the last remaining pocket. Danilo moves to help him, but before he can react, a shark lunges at him, and in an instant, Kyle is gone. Danilo, who is now horrified, rushes to join Ava and Rosa, who have just retrieved the dead diver's tank to replenish their oxygen. Wasting no time, Ava sends Rosa and Danilo through the opening. Just as she prepares to follow, a shark blocks her exit. With no other choice, she retreats, remaining motionless as the predator swims past without noticing her. But as it passes, its tail hits her mask off, taking off her source of oxygen. Seconds later, more sharks enter through the hole. With no escape in that direction, Ava makes a desperate sprint toward the front. But the plane starts descending rapidly, and the intense water pressure holds her back. She holds on to the seats as she fights against the current and tries to force herself forward. At the last possible second, she slips through the opening, just as the plane vanishes into the depths of the sea. Now gasping for air, Ava begins her ascent. But she was exhausted, and with her low oxygen levels, her vision darkened and her body stopped moving as she blacks out. Fortunately, her flotation device does its job, carrying her upward. The moment she breaks into the surface and she gets fresh air, she jolts awake. Consciousness dawns on her as she scans the water, but Rosa and Danilo are nowhere in sight. Just as panic sets in, a helicopter arrives and pulls her to safety. Inside the helicopter, Ava discovers that Danilo and Rosa have already been rescued. When Rosa asks about her grandmother, Ava can only deliver the heartbreaking truth. In silent farewell, Rosa releases her cherished plushie into the water before falling into Ava's arms as they fly off to safety, with their nightmare finally over. And that is the story of the movie, No Way Up, a 2024 action horror movie. If you enjoyed the recap, consider dropping a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.